despite mountains of evidence to the contrary, President Trump accusing Ukraine of instigating the war with Russia. Is Donald Trump actually sincere or just maneuvering to better broker a peace deal? At the state capitol, the push is on to keep violent repeat offenders behind bars pending trial. Will judges finally get new discretion on granting bail, or will Democrats once again deny Texans a referendum on the issue? And the gigantic salary hikes granted Harris County executives. Cash-strapped taxpayers are footing the tab, but are they getting anything close to value for their hard-earned dollars? I'm Greg Groogan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, Houston attorney and conservative commentator Gary Polland. Next up, longtime Houston journalist and social worker Chow Nguyen. In the 3 spot, writer and public policy analyst Charles Blaine. Batting cleanup, Bill King, well-known businessman, columnist, and fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute. And closing us out, education and public safety advocate Paul Castro. Let's begin.
There has been at least 162 homicide cases filed in Harris County, Texas, for defendants released on 1 or more bonds at the time of a new murder offense. Think about that. 162 people needlessly killed, families grieving and suffering because this legislature failed to enact common sense, fair legislation.
Houston State Senator Joan Huffman pleading with colleagues to deliver overdue relief for families of Texas crime victims, past and future. Senate Joint Resolution 5 would grant Texas criminal court judges the discretion to deny violent defendants bond if there is clear and convincing evidence that denial is necessary to preserve public safety or to ensure the defendant's appearance in court. This proposed bonding discretion for those on the bench has drawn vocal support from a bipartisan coalition of prosecutors, including the Democratic DAs for Dallas and Fort Bend counties.
There should be no constitutional right for perpetrators to prey on Texas citizens. But that's what's happening.
If judges had made the appropriate decision and had this tool, I believe those people would still be alive.
SJR 5 was approved on a 29-2 vote, with Houston freshman State Senator Molly Cook publicly lodging her opposition. The measure now heads to the House, where a 2/3 vote is required to place the bond reform measure on the statewide ballot for Texans to ultimately decide. Panel House Democrats have managed to derail bond reform in the 2 previous sessions, preventing a referendum, triggering victim advocates to charge that by their inaction, they share blame for the lives lost. No one knows more about this than you, Paul Castro. Your thoughts on SJR 5?
Yeah, so I support it. My concern is the rationale behind those who are opposing it. And so I'll specifically call out my state senator, Molly Cook, who said that her concerns were that it was failing to expand right to counsel, it applied too broadly for violent offenses, and it directed bail officers to consider the likelihood to appear versus the willful failure to appear. And that to me is insufficient. The fact that her comment said nothing about victims and about the safety of the community is deeply concerning to me. My mom's family grew up in poverty. They raised us as working class kids, and we raped, killed, and stole exactly as much as our community forced us to, which is 0, right? So putting off, like, oh, well, let's think about what caused people to be here? What created this situation where this person became a killer? No, what should be considered and concerning is what happens to the community because we have 200 killers out on the street right now on bond who are continuing to do things. Because what we don't know is how many of them are the ones that are responsible for these unsolved murders. If you've pulled a trigger once, you're going to pull it again. I worry about that, and there are people who are against this who are more worried about the rights of the accused. And if that's where you start, if that's your starting point, you've lost the narrative.
Chow Nguyen, you help victims of sexual assault put their lives back together. Many of them live in fear. Your thoughts here?
Well, my heart hurts for Paul and so many victims' families who have lost loved ones in violent crimes. This is a tough issue, but so long as this legislation is narrow enough to keep offenders, sexual assault offenders and violent criminals behind bars, how can anybody in the community not support it? Look, I counsel a lot of survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault who've lost family members, and they want accountability and they want to stay safe, and safety is a community-wide problem. I say if we keep it narrow and we look at those violent offenders who have repeated themselves and keep them behind bars, we do have to address other issues like jail overcrowding, et cetera. But we start from there. We start with the safety of families, accountability, and justice, quite frankly.
Day in, day out, Gary Pollan is in our criminal courts defending Houstonians. Is this discretion needed by judges?
I think it's appropriate to give the judges discretion, and I think that what's important to stress, and in reference to what Molly Cook said, the burden of proof on the state to establish a no-bond situation under this bill is clear and convincing evidence. That's the second highest level of burden of proof we have in our entire judicial system. It is a significant burden, and I think that's the safeguard that we have for those who should not be put in that situation. But I think our judges need the tools to do what's appropriate under the circumstances, as, by the way, the state, and where they believe this person is a danger to our community. And the statistics cited by Senator Huffman are just outrageous, that we have 168 people dead, killed by somebody out on bond.
You know, a lot of our viewers may not know that Charles Blaine goes into penitentiaries to counsel and help guide folks who are trying to rebuild their lives. Charles, what do you make of SJR 5? Is this something needed in a community where public safety has been consistently the most important issue?
Well, I mean, I think Paul brings up a good point. The victim should be at the center of this, but I do want to emphasize that we have to balance the two. We do have to look at the rights of the accused and what they're afforded. And the thing when it comes to this is that discretion is only as good as who's applying it. And I think for a long time here in Harris County, conservatives in particular have complained about the judiciary and them applying discretion and letting some people out. And so how are we reassured that the discretion is going to be applied appropriately moving forward? I do think that overall SJR 5 is good. I think if it's on the ballot, I'm probably going to vote for it. But I think some of the concerns raised are valid. And I think even our friend Bob last week brought up some of the concerns that he had about the wide net that this might be able to cast with some people who may unintentionally be brought into it. So I do think there are some questions. Maybe they'll be hashed out when it gets to the House.
Bill King, the political landscape. This measure has passed the Senate easily, but Democrats have been able to derail it in the House because they've stuck together on this. 30 seconds.
So the Texas Constitution bail provisions are a mess. They relate all the way back to the founding of the state and some historical circumstances at that time. It absolutely needs to be amended. The Senate has put something forward. The House needs to look at it. If they've got problems with it, they need to amend it and send it back to the Senate. The problem is in the last session, it was killed quietly in calendars, probably by a Houston area state representative, and that's not the way to address this problem. Amend it, send it back to the Senate, have a conference committee, but the law needs to be updated.
Progress, not perfection. Still to come, President Donald Trump drifting into misinformation, accusing Ukraine of instigating the war with Russia, and then walking it back. But up next, our discussion of bail reform continues with none other than Harris County's top prosecutor, Sean Teare, in the House to offer his perspective. We are pleased to welcome Harris County District Attorney Sean Teare to the program. Sean, glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right, simple question. If SJR 5 were on the ballot tomorrow and you had to vote, would you vote for it?
That's a tough question. There are parts of SJR 5 that I fully support and wrote a letter specifically outlining why. Giving the judiciary the discretion to hold violent offenders at no bond is something that's long overdue. We have lost people that would be here today if the judges had that ability. There's no question. But it doesn't go far enough in ensuring that the right outcome happens, that the judges have the information that they need. And in addition, it doesn't give us a relief valve on the back end to make sure we can get the cases through the system in a timely manner. Because as it sits right now, we'd be looking at 4 to 5 years in order to get them processed through the system. So SJR 5 needs to pass with the rights of the accused being protected, meaning they need lawyers at that hearing. We need to have an evidentiary hearing. But also, the state needs to use some of that surplus and give us the crime lab funding so that ballistics don't take 18 months to get done, so that we can really go forward and prosecute these people in a timely manner. And let's use some of the money to really do diversions, to actually tackle the mental health and substance use disorder problems that we know we have.
Sean, you've been a frontline prosecutor. You have put people away. You have hugged victims. And, you know, so what's your message to them when we hear that 164 victim number? What's your message to these families?
That it's not okay. That if we lose one to someone that should have and could have been in custody, that's too much. We've got to come together. We've got to work bipartisan-wise and get something passed. I think Bill was exactly right. But to suggest this is the Democrats' fault is just patently false, right? We have had every state position, every single state elected position has been held by a Republican for a generation. So it is their fault unequivocally.
You heard Bill suggest amendment in the House, send it back.
Yes.
Are you ready to look at this? Would you favor that?
There's no question. I've been in touch with numerous state reps. I've been in touch with Senator Huffman. That's what's got to happen. We have got to get the relief valves on the back end, and we've got to get the priorities set up for the right due process outcomes to happen. And if that happens, then I am in full support of SJR 5 the way that it needs to be written.
Quickly on the Harding Street case.
Yep.
You looked at the case, felt like there wasn't enough evidence. We wanted to hear you expand upon that. What was flawed about the cases against the 8 HPD officers charged with corruption?
Sure, and I'll take Charles to task a little bit last week, saying that we didn't outline in detail what we found when we started looking at this. We filed a Brady notice that was a multi-page Brady notice outlining exactly what our investigation did. There are cell phone records that we had that show definitively that these 8 public servants, decades-long public servants, did nothing wrong. We had outside agencies look at this specifically with all the evidence we had and said there were no crimes committed by these 8. Not that we couldn't prove it, that they did not commit crimes. We have 8 public servants who lost their jobs, who lost their reputations, and who spent 4 years battling something that was strictly political and an attack against HPD. And it's unacceptable.
Sean Teare, thanks for being here. Hope to have you back.
I'll be back.
All right. Up next, you may think the road to affluence rarely runs through government service. Just wait until you see the kind of pay raises they're handing out to a privileged few running Harris County. Strapped for cash, struggling to make ends meet, burdened by brutally higher property taxes? Well, perhaps you should consider applying for an executive position with Harris County, where annual raises have blasted past generous to absolutely exorbitant. Hats off to Bob Rehack, citizen editor of Reduce Flooding Now, for digging up the numbers.
Head of engineering got an increase of $135,000 in 1 year. The head of Universal Services got $110,000. The temporary head of Public Health also got a raise for $110,000, and that's not even a permanent position. The medical examiner and the head of flood control each got $90,000 raises. To put that in perspective, those 8 department heads in Harris County make more than the President of the United States.
So how about bang for our taxpayer buck? Does this highly compensated leadership have Harris County government hitting on all cylinders? Well, Certainly not the flood control and engineering departments, which report a massive shortfall in project completion related to the 2018 $5 billion flood bond, with the only explanation being inflation. Again, Bob Rehak for the hard bottom line.
That means a third of the projects aren't going to get done. And we don't have a plan to fix that, really.
No plan, according to Rehak, from the very executives we taxpayers just enriched with six-figure annual raises. Panel, you can't make this stuff up. I should mention that Judge Lena Hidalgo has publicly suggested the county just ask citizens for more of their cash in the form of yet another multi-billion-dollar bond. I'm guessing this hacks you off.
Yeah, I certainly would vote no. Look, here's what happens in the private sector. You fail in your job, you don't meet your goals, you get fired. You work for Harris County, you get an exorbitant pay raise and stuff doesn't get done. You worry about the state of this county, which I believe is deteriorating rapidly under the leadership of Democrats that are clearly not into what they want to do or don't know what they're doing. So the bottom line is the taxpayers should be in absolute revolt. What are we doing? And you talked about the Toll Road Authority. Let's remember that the toll road, the county Democrats are siphoning money from the toll road and using it for their pet projects instead of paying down the debt. This stuff is horrendous, and it's not going to get right till we replace some of these Democrats on Commissioner's Court with conservative Republicans who have some cojones.
Bill King.
Yeah, so, I just want to remind everybody that your property taxes in Harris County went up by an average of 15% last year. So at the same time, they're asking you for 15% more money. They're giving all these raises. And by the way, the commissioner's got a 10% raise as well. So, if you talk about a $400,000 salary, it takes something like about 200 or 300 homeowners' property taxes just to pay that salary. This is absolutely out of control. And while I am not a partisan at all, as most of you know, we absolutely need to make some changes on Commissioner's Court, and it needs to start with the county judge, who is the one that leads the charge on every one of these initiatives where money makes no difference to her.
Hard 30, Charles.
There's no way to run a county. I mean, when you look at this, and then, like Bill said, 200 to 300 people to pay for these raises, but yet we have an overcrowded jail. They can't build a new jail. Flood control, obviously underfunded, and we can't get projects done. The constables' deputies and sheriff's deputies are underpaid. There's all these other priorities that are going unfixed when we're giving these raises to people. And, it's particularly on the county engineer, the one who just told them that they were $130 million short and also got this significant raise. It's unbelievable.
I'd have rather given all of that money to Chow's clients.
I agree.
Yeah, mental health services, et cetera. I think when the county commissioners say this is a crisis for them too. I mean, it's a little bit of hypocrisy if you're paying yourself a nice salary, giving yourself a 10% raise, and then everybody else. It is a little alarming to see those kinds of numbers in those top executives. Kudos to them for doing really well, but what about the rest of us?
Yeah, I want to hear what Paul Castro has to say about this in overtime. Still to come, a question of equity, the outcry over plans to pour additional millions into a single Houston park when dozens of others languish in disrepair.
As you can see, we don't even have a decent playground. We have a gazebo that's filthy, hasn't been cleaned, doesn't even have park benches for kids to have birthday parties here, have a little barbecue cookout, and folks on the weekend. We don't have a soccer field, we don't even have a track. I mean, it's just completely, as you can see, filled with trash, empty beer cans and all sorts of things, and it's just been neglected for so long, and it really upsets me that other areas continue to thrive and have more while we have less.
Dr. Sergio Lira, president of LULAC Greater Houston and WIP team member, totally hacked off by the continuing neglect of literally dozens of city parks in mostly working class communities as new parks are being built and existing facilities like Levy Park in Upper Kirby on the brink of a TERS-funded $14 million expansion. Lira has toured many of Houston's most ramshackle parks and gathered pictures like this Latino family compelled to fashion their own makeshift swing, and more disturbing images of homeless campers and discarded condoms. His message to the mayor and council is simple.
Their priorities are backwards. They should literally start from the parks that are the most needy before they even approve any type of extra expenditures. But what's happening is that some of the parks that already have playgrounds and have amenities are getting more.
Panel, this is a fundamental issue of inequity perpetuated in part by those tax increment reinvestment zones, which return hundreds of millions of city tax dollars directly to the prosperous neighborhoods where they came from. Bill King, you don't like this one bit.
Yeah, this is a great example of how crazy this TERS system has become in Houston. Now, look, TERS are extremely common across the country. There's some good uses for them. We have some that do a good job. But the way we run them in Houston has been completely run amok now for a long time. So we have this park, Levy Park, over in Upper Kirby, a very wealthy neighborhood. It's a beautiful park, you know, in the middle of some high-rise buildings and everything. And they want to go spend $14.5 million doing about a 1.5 acre expansion of this park. You know, it is just unbelievable. This is how you would prioritize your money. This is about 20% of the park budget for the whole city for the year. You know, we did a parks assessment, and we listed, I think it's 186 parks we have in the city, by the ones that needed the most work and the one that needed the less support. Guess what number 186 was? Levy Park. And yet City Council almost unanimously approved to give it $14.5 million at a recent council meeting. How does this make any sense at all?
Paul, I suspect many of your students live in those working class neighborhoods. What do you make of this issue?
First of all, the one person who didn't was Councilmember Julian Ramirez, so kudos to him, because someone finally needed to break that seal. What I see when I see this is I see the system operating as it was designed, right? So this is where, so if the money's generated through the TERS and the TERS then gets that money, that's the system that we created. So the reform is not saying that the TERS has to then give money back to the city and the city's going to redistribute that money. That's not the way the system works. We created the system. We're allowing the system. We're electing people to perpetuate the system. And unless we put pressure on our council members and get them to join Councilman Ramirez to say no to this, and more importantly, to relook at, to Bill's point, should we even be continuing to use this? Once that park has reached what it's supposed to be, can we take that TERS down? I think the answer needs to be yes.
30 seconds to Charles Blaine.
I mean, it's just a shame. Yeah, I mean, to put money towards the park that comes dead last on the list to need for in terms of need, it's ridiculous. But we are a very philanthropic city, and I think if the city is not going to act, we should lean back on that program that Turner used to do, the Spark Parks, where the companies adopted the parks and did them, because clearly the city's not going to take initiative to do the parks.
All right, we can talk more about it later. When we come back, President Trump trash talks Ukraine, inexplicably claiming the invaded country actually started the war.
Today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
President Donald Trump this week straying sharply from the truth, suggesting democratic Ukraine was to blame for the violation of its own sovereignty via invasion by totalitarian Russia. Allies of the president rushed to his defense, contending the commander-in-chief is just maneuvering to bring the bloody 3-year war to a peaceful end. On Friday, Mr. Trump backtracked on his earlier claim, conceding Russia was in fact the aggressor, but could have been talked out of the vicious land grab by more skillful leadership and negotiation. Panel, during the blowback period, the president was accused of parroting Russian talking points and lambasted by even Republican backers for labeling Ukrainian President Zelensky as a dictator. In my opinion, a pretty farcical statement when the counterparty is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, who's a professional dictator. Look, Trump speaks off the cuff, not with prepared remarks, and so he said some things that were kind of dumb. And he's been criticized for it. They've walked it back. I think that what Trump's trying to do is encourage negotiations. He's right about this being a nasty, bloody war for both sides, with hundreds of thousands of deaths, with billions of dollars of damage done. So that's okay if that's the end game. But if he really believes that Ukraine started the war, we got a problem.
Thoughts here, Chow?
As my very good friends, well, I was about to say senator, but Mayor John Whitmire said, words matter. Tells me that all the time. Words matter. Words matter here. Look, I watch this and I take this personally as a Vietnamese refugee immigrant coming to this country to escape persecution in the name of democracy as the world leader. His message to the world stage, creating this new world order, whatever he thinks it is, matters, and it's dangerous. And I can't tell you how many citizens I've spoken to, friends who are like, you know what, I'm a little worried about what's going on in our globe. I'm not going to travel, I'm not going to do these things because I just don't know. So the words of our president, our world leader, matter. When he says things and sides with Vladimir Putin, I think that sets a very dangerous precedence when it comes to democracy and what freedom means to our world.
Paul, what do you think of the theory that the president is just cozying up a little bit to Putin in order to maneuver the situation into actual peace?
Yeah, so he's three-dimensional chess. I don't know about that. Here's where I feel. I feel like there was a time where we used to know who the good guys were, right? And so when the screen came up and it was Rocky versus Drago, we knew who we were rooting for, right? When Red Dawn, came out, like we knew we were rooting against the Russians. And now I think if the 2026 version of those films come out, I think it's going to be kind of a both sides. Like, well, Drago's kind of a nice guy and he's got a good jawline, and the Russians, they need some additional corn, and like we have too much in Nebraska. So I worry about how it's repositioning the way people think about the world. And if we can't say our way of doing, government is better, if we can't say that, if we say that the greatest enemy is within, I worry about the youth who are being influenced by TikTok, Chinese-owned, and who are being told what I believe to be lies about how the world should operate and buying into that, and whether that's going to influence how they are as future leaders.
All right, Bill, I hearken back to Senator John Cornyn and others who said, look, we've, with our support of Ukraine, degraded one of our primary adversaries' military by 60 or 70%. I mean, what do you think of the give and take here and the president's recent statement?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with Chow on that words matter, and I wish he wouldn't say stupid stuff. It's not kind of dumb. It was stupid, and it just is not true. But I will say about Trump, like I mentioned this earlier, I reread The Art of the Deal, and everything's a negotiation with him. That's the way he views the entire world, and this is what he views in negotiation. And I will say that he is in a position to actually get something done here, where Biden probably was not in a position to get something done. And if he's able to bring peace into the area, and by the way, get rare earths for us, which seems to be a big part of what's on his mind, I think all that's going to be a positive for us. But, you do a lot of damage to the fabric of morality by saying things like this along the way.
Can't happen soon enough, huh, Charles? Regardless of how it happens?
Regardless of that. Listen, I think, we could spend the next 4 years outraged or shocked by whatever the next thing he says that is a little more outspoken or brash than the previous. I think we're gonna keep hearing that, but this is how he operates, and a lot of times it's used as a tactic to get what he wants, and I think that's what we had to do, take a back seat and just sometimes not be outraged by things and let him backtrack and fix what he said, just like he did in this instance.
We will be here every week to do exactly that. Still to come, Kash Patel confirmed as head of the FBI. Will the president's pick purge politics from the agency or turn its power on Trump's perceived enemies? But up next, the world's most powerful military bracing for a budgetary haircut. Can Secretary Hegseth find the fat without compromising the nation's security?
In short, we want the biggest, most badass military on the planet, on God's green earth.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth making a fundamental pledge, a pledge some suggest is inconsistent with a significant 8% trimming of DOD's budget and a hiring freeze amounting to $50 billion. Here's how Hegseth explains it.
So it's not a cut, it's refocusing and reinvesting existing funds into building a force that protects you, the American people.
Panel, it's been widely reported that the Pentagon has failed to pass its last 7 audits, and given its $4 trillion worth of assets and $820 billion annual budget, there certainly appears to be room for savings, which leaves us with the legitimate question of whether Hegseth and his team can actually find find those cuts without compromising security? I guess find the fat would be a better word. Look, Gary?
That is the biggest bloated bureaucracy we have in the country, the Pentagon. And we have, if you failed audits, we have weapons programs that take forever and then they get rid of them because they don't function the way they should. We have too much brass in the military. It's just a giant mess. So can they find money to cut for the, I think you can cut the budget by a third. We have the largest defense budget in the world. And we are wasting money, just like every other government agency. So DOJ needs to set up camp in the Defense Department and find money. And they want to find money because President Trump thinks it's a good idea that the U.S. have some kind of missile defense from intercontinental ballistic missiles. Remember Star Wars under Reagan? The Democrats hampered it for years and years, never had it. Israel built it, but the U.S. doesn't have it. He wants to spend money to develop that so the American people are protected. I think it's a great idea. Get rid of all the social garbage that came in with Biden. Let's have a Defense Department that's defending the American people.
Paul, 30 seconds.
Yeah, my worry is that in looking for fat, they actually cut into bone. So they're looking at disability benefits. My dad's 100% disabled, Vietnam vet, Agent Orange. They cut back on the VA hotline. I'm not sure if that's been reinstituted, but that was one of the initial cuts. And then they cut the judge advocate general positions in the 3 major branches. And that's a big, big concern. They just got fired. That's more of a, like, can they manage this? And the worry I have is, why would you do that? Why would you go and kill the watchdogs, right? And so these are all things that I worry about when it comes to what happens next.
Baby out with the bathwater?
Yes, but I can't take back those 8 minutes of that clip that you sent me. So thank you very much. Great performance, Hegseth. You know, he's a TV anchor, right? He's theatrics. What I'm concerned with is what Paul expressed, which is this unintended consequences of these massive layoffs and firings, and what happens in our communities when it comes to VA benefits, when it comes to mental health services, talk about getting rid of Medicaid. All these families and people who worked very hard to take these positions and now getting, you know, these pink slips saying you're not wanted. Well, you might be needed. And so I think that the aftermath of these layoffs are going to tell us a lot, and it might be really, really bad for our communities.
Quickly, Charles, could the antidote be worse than the actual disease?
I mean, sure, if not done correctly, but I mean, you have an $849 billion budget, and I think it was $1.7 trillion spent between DOD and its 6 components. There's money to be cut. There are efficiencies to be found, and yeah, they might have some growing pains along the way. They're going to make mistakes along the way. This is the Trump's first administration where he's actually had seemingly really competent people going through these things. It doesn't seem like it was the first time around. So there's still going to be mistakes, but I do trust that the processes they're putting in place, they're going to find a lot of the fat, just like they're finding in other departments.
We'll keep an eye on it. Up next, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is officially under new management, and his name is Kash Patel. Will the president's pick generate positive reform, or, as his critics fear, launch a retaliatory mission?
Any law enforcement investigation, if I'm confirmed at the FBI, will only be launched on the following qualification: a factual, articulable legal basis to do so. The president has said publicly that he will allow the FBI to remain independent, and I have said as much as well.
Kash Patel, President Trump's pick to lead the FBI, was narrowly confirmed by the Senate this week to lead the agency. Democratic critics raised the specter of Patel orchestrating a purge of agents and deploying the FBI's assets to investigate the president's adversaries. And let's face it, that's what many of the president's most ardent MAGA supporters are craving.
Lock them all up. I'll make it so. Pelosi, Schumer, Waters, Eric Swalwell, and the rest of you, you better get ready for the charges I'm bringing you. Schiff, you'll be in jail real soon. I'm gonna lock you up in a hotel bathroom. Diddy, I didn't forget about you. Soros, Epstein, and JFK too. Fauci, Gates, and the Clintons better pray. You're gonna need some bail money. Cash is on the way.
All right, a little levity there. Panel, for his part, Patel has promised to depoliticize and restructure the agency. Bill, I'm throwing this at you.
Well, first of all, I think the independence of the FBI is a little bit of a myth. I mean, you got to remember what J. Edgar Hoover did with Martin Luther King back in the day. And so, look, these police agencies are always going to be used for political purposes to some degree. And I think they were in the last administration. I mean, I've said here on this show that there's some of the Trump investigation that I don't think would have taken place but for it being Trump. you know. And so the question is, you know, is this going to be sort of within the normal bounds, or is this going to be something new we haven't seen? I don't think we know this. I wouldn't have voted to confirm this guy, but, you know, we'll have to see how he actually does.
Gary, I'm going to count on you to call out lawfare on this guy as ardently and consistently as you did.
Yeah, as we were saying, two wrongs don't make a right. I mean, look, Trump was treated like garbage. There was so much abuse by the Biden administration with him with lawfare. It's unbelievable. And the fact, though I do give it partial credit for him becoming president because he became a martyr. I like what Patel said. A non-political FBI, it would be refreshing. So we need to give the FBI back to law enforcement, dealing with criminals, dealing with spies. And that's what we need to do. And if he doesn't, he should be called out. The Democrats' problem, which is a pattern throughout we've seen so far in the Trump administration, everything Trump wants to do is evil and the worst thing ever. Everything. And they are the boy who cried wolf over and over again. And when the day comes where Trump really does something that's bad or dangerous, if that happens, the American people aren't going to listen because it's the same stuff they've been saying over and over again. I
count on Paul Castro to kind of keep an eye on this. What will you be looking for? I mean, look, Biden issued pardons for a whole, you know, phalanx of people.
Yeah, I think one of the things, first of all, is what Patel has been pinned as by people who were in the Trump administration, part one, is that he has no spine. He's a Gumby. He does whatever, you know, he's told to do. So here's an interesting thing. So last night late, he actually put out an email to his staff that was counteracting what Elon Musk put out, which is, here are the 5 things you got done this week. And he essentially told his FBI team, don't respond to that email. So we might be seeing the beginnings of a spine forming, or at least someone told him, send this email. Either way, that might be a first step in creating some type of safeguards against this stuff that's pushing.
20 seconds, Shal.
I just hope it doesn't compromise public safety for American people. I mean, you've got a reckoning of a very big department. Agents are going to be told they're moving to Alabama, getting out of D.C. This is a big disruption to a big, long-standing organization whose mission is really to protect our people.
Yeah, maybe it'll be for the best or not. We'll see. When we come back, reeling back the culture of DEI, Vice President J.D. Vance leading the charge in a campaign that appears certain to intensify. The culture war in these United States is on and escalating. Exhibit A, Vice President J.D. Vance speaking at CPAC.
The cultural message, and I think the president's and mine is the exact opposite, but our cultural message is I think that it wants to turn everybody, into, whether male or female, into androgynous idiots who think the same, talk the same, and act the same. We actually think God made male and female for a purpose, and we want you guys to thrive as young men and as young women, and we're going to help with our public policy to make it possible to do that.
Panel, the counteroffensive against everything perceived as woke or DEI is underway. A pendulum swing, so to speak, which gained considerable traction during the campaign. My question, how much of this purge is too much, Charles?
I mean, listen, I think the question, 15 years ago, that probably wouldn't have been as big of a deal. And I don't think it's that big of a deal now that he said that. I think what is happening, what we're seeing is this pushback against the left's attempt to still control language. What we've seen over in recent years is this push from the left to cancel people or to shame them from saying certain things. And that's their way to control language and then control policy outcomes, control politics and everything else. And so the right is now pushing back against that. And I think you're going to see shocking and hear shocking things because people are fed up with it. And I think that is a big part of this most recent election that came out, is people frustrated with the world that the left has tried to create and tried to keep them in and disallowing them from saying or believing things that they do.
All right, jump in here, Chow.
Well, disrespectful discord. This is so disrespectful. I tell my kids all the time, we don't name call, we don't call. Idiot is a bad word in our household, right? And we have our leaders, our vice president using words like this. I would just suggest he has kids, maybe he'll have grandkids, maybe he'll have extended family. What if this happened to his family, right? What if one of his kids turns out to be, searching for their gender identity, transgender? These are things that are real people's lives, and it's very hurtful, and it creates more discord and distance between the parties. Not respectful.
I'm not hearing that there's anything trying to outlaw transgender or anything like that, but it probably is a pushback.
Oh, there's no question it was a pushback. And look, I don't think Trump and Vance would have won but for the social issues. I think they were really important. Men and women's sports, a huge issue. Democrats ignored it, thought it was no big deal. They pushed it, and the public said no. So I think what Vance said is spot on. I think that's how things are. We're not saying that we should take transgender people and put them in jail or lock them up or do whatever. But, you know, part of what's so sinister, what happened under the Biden administration, was the attempt to teach our children, and especially our young children, that some of these behaviors are normal and you should be that. Well, one of my beliefs is that people who become transgender, there's a small percentage that maybe were born that way, but the bigger percentage of those who were recruited into this cult.
Professional educator. Go.
Yeah, I think we should expand. I don't think we have to qualify androgynous idiots. We should be against idiots in general having positions of power. So I don't want to be restrictive there. I think the additional thing is what we should be doing is, like, the left should be listening to, why is this reverberating with so many people who are independents or former Democrats? And I think the thing is, it's a pushback against what they felt was an overplay, and we can go the other way, perhaps.
All right. We can talk more about it in overtime, too. Still to come, regrouping for the political battles to come. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries talks new Democratic priorities, and they may just surprise you. On tonight's edition of Texas, the Issue Is, airing at 9:45 right here on Fox 26. We're talking to House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries about the challenging path forward for his Democratic Party.
We believe that we have to make border security a priority and do it in an enlightened fashion. We have a broken immigration system. We have to fix it in a bipartisan and comprehensive way. We also have to make sure that we are looking out for dreamers and farm workers and families who contribute to the economic vitality of the American people. And those will all be priorities for us.
All right, a breaking, troubling development involving the Houston Police Department. Charles, what are you hearing?
Yeah, well, it was an interesting story with the chief of the auto theft division, Darren Edwards, 32-year veteran who had been sexually assaulting this minor girl for years, ever since she was in elementary school. And he was arrested on child porn and aggravated sexual assault. And one of the recent things that came out is that she said over the last year it escalated, and he sexually assaulted her between 85 to 100 times.
Oh, my God.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking, Chow.
Behind closed doors, it happens more often. You know, Charles and I were talking offline about this, and he's like, oh, it's so shocking and surprising. Not so shocking and surprising. Child abuse among people who are family members or close family friends is more common than you know. A lot of it happens in silence for a long time. Hopefully, as people hear this, they know that there is help available.
All right, we'll follow the story. Thanks to this week's panel, and thank you for joining us. The conversation continues next on a national level on Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream. And we'll keep talking here with What's Your Point Overtime, streaming live on fox26houston.com and on our free Fox Local app for your phone or smart TV. From all of us here, have a safe and healthy week. Tune in.